We are now going to remove the Tailor Rack CGB by placing it in the Billy Bob shaft extractor. It is important to tighten the jaws of the extractor. The jaws of the Billy Bob shaft extractor are 5 to 6 inches of gripping power, and they hold the shaft from falling through. The shaft extractor has 4 different positions on the turret. One is a 335, one for 350, one for 370 or 400, and the largest one will pull all the specialty clubs such as Callaways and Pings. The extractor can be placed anywhere as it is vertical and takes up minimal space, or you can lay it down horizontal, which will allow you to use a heat rod for head removal. In this segment, we are pulling the rack ferrule. First, place it in the turret for 350. After placing it in the turret, heat up the club using a heat gun or torch. We will be using a heat gun to heat it. You can also use a torch, but be very careful to avoid discoloring of the finish on the club. If using a torch, hold it back a little and heat it slowly. You can remove the ferrule, but we suggest not removing the ferrule as it adds more cushion for pulling the club. Next, move up the extractor using a jack, and it will remove the head very easily. After removing the head, take the ferrule off and then undo the jaws of the extractor. Pull out the shaft. After removing the head and ferrule from the shaft, you need to clean all the old epoxy off the shaft. Using a 1x42 microbelt for microbelt sander, you can sand off all the epoxy from the shaft without damaging the fibers in a graphite shaft. First, turn on the sander, and using easy pressure, turn the shaft against the belt with one hand while holding it with the other. All of the epoxy is removed and the shaft is now prepped. Be sure not to touch the prepped part with your hand, as the oils from your hand can degrade the epoxy when you build the club. To prep a new shaft, you need to have at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches of paint removal. Using a 1x42 microbelt from a microbelt sander, you can remove the paint. First, turn on the sander, and using easy pressure, turn the shaft against the belt with one hand while holding it with the other. If you push too hard or use too much pressure, you can damage the shaft or remove too much paint. Once the shaft has been removed from the Tailor CGB, it looks like this. It has an extended collar that no other iron has, and Tailor has incorporated this collar in its OS model line and the HT line. These are all part of the Tailor RAC irons line. The collar is also incorporated on the Rescue Fairway wood. Billy Bob's makes a ferrule for each of these heads. There is a recessed groove in the ferrule that will clip on the collar, so there's no need to do anything special to the ferrule. Place the ferrule on the collar and then turn the head upside down and push down to secure the ferrule. If for some reason during the assembly the ferrule needs to be removed, insert a shaft into the ferrule, push it in a little, and then just pull it off. Now we'll move to assembling the club. First, we prepare the epoxy. A quick golf tip: use old golf magazines to mix the epoxy on because they are plastic-coated pages and the chemicals aren't absorbed. If you use cardboard or paper, the oils from those surfaces can degrade the epoxy. After mixing the epoxy thoroughly, put some epoxy inside the head. Then, insert the ferrule on the collar. If you don't clip it on first, it will be difficult to get the ferrule on over the ridge after inserting the shaft. After the ferrule is securely on the collar, put a little epoxy on the shaft and then insert it into the head. Some of the epoxy may come up, but you want to make sure you get the shaft completely inserted. Once the shaft is inserted, you can clean it with alcohol and a paper towel to remove the residual epoxy. Then, set up to dry. To assemble the Tailor Rescue, we will follow the same steps for assembling the Tailor RAC. The only difference between the Rescue and the iron is the iron has a 370 diameter shaft and the Rescue takes a 350 diameter shaft. Therefore, the only difference between the ferrules used is the ID. Once the club is dry, it is very important to make sure there is a nice clean edge on your ferrule, where the ferrule inserts into the hosel. To smooth it out, we use a cloth belt on a 1x42 belt sander along with a ferrule guide. The ferrule guide allows you to put the shaft in to keep it even. Turn on the sander and rotate the club, which takes off the fine layers of the ferrule and gives it a nice finish. If you do not have a ferrule guide, you can hold the club in one hand while rotating it with the other and applying light pressure against the belt. However, using the ferrule guide made by Golfsmith allows you to get the ferrule nice and even. Once there is a nice smooth edge, turn off the sander and now it is time to polish the ferrule. To polish, put some acetone on an inexpensive paper towel. Cheaper brands are preferable as the more expensive paper towel brands will leave lint behind. Starting at the bottom, gently move the paper towel around to coat the ferrule. To put a high shine on it, add a little more acetone on the paper towel and then lightly polish it across the top. This will give you a nice sheen on the ferrule.